So before I get on with the video, I just want to take a moment to say that this is my own personal experience with mental health, my own experience with anxiety, and my own experience with depression. I feel like by me sharing my story, it gives you an opportunity to understand me a little bit better and get to know me a little bit better and how my passion and interest for mental health happened. I like to consider myself open about how I'm coping with anxiety and my depression, and I feel as if by me being like that, it opens me up to creating those conversations around mental health. So this kind of like brings me to my point of this, is that if by me opening up and sharing my experience and my story with anxiety and depression helps one person, it helps you feel not so alone in what you're going through, and it opens up a conversation around how mental health exists and how it does affect people in today's society. That's all I could ask for from this video, and this is what the channel is about. Hey guys, welcome back to the Thought Grub. So if you can't tell by the title of this video, today's video is my mental health story, my experience with anxiety and my experience with depression. This video has been a bit of a struggle. I originally wanted to write everything out and then film this, and for some reason that just was not happening. I am struggling to write out my story, write out my experiences, so I thought I would just sit in front of the camera and just talk, just tell my story as what comes to my mind. So yeah, I guess we'll get on with my story. So I feel like from a young age, I've had the signs of anxiety. I've always been a worrier. I've always sweat the small things and let them get to me. Looking back into my childhood, I believe I had anxiety. I've had the signs of anxiety from a very young age, like looking back into my toddler years and early childhood. I remember hearing stories from my parents, and I have some memory of this, but I remember hearing stories of how distressed I would become when it came to daycare, how much I used to cry and throw tantrums and just refuse to go. Like I said, I have some memory of these. I remember, being dropped off at childcare and crying and being so distressed. Like, I remember screaming, don't go, like screaming and crying, and so to the point where I was coughing because I was hurting my throat from how distressed and overwhelmed I was with being left alone at daycare. I remember like crying all morning and my daycare teacher like trying to console me, and it just was not working. Eventually I would stop crying and I'd get on with the day, but this was a constant occurrence, constantly happening nearly every morning. Looking back, I feel like new situations and separation anxiety as well as sleep have been problems and issues that I've had from a very young age. And it continued to grow into primary school. So when primary school started, it became a whole lot more noticeable. I've always been a little bit shy, a little bit awkward, and starting school brought a whole new aspect to my life and to my anxiety. Looking back, I do believe like I didn't know what those feelings were, but I now know them to be anxiety. I've always found it hard to make friends. I've always been shy and a little bit awkward, and I've always found it hard to go up, approach people and talk to them and make new friends because I have this fear of being disliked and disappointing others, coming across as rude or hurting them. So that made it a lot harder for me to make friends when primary school started. In grade 1, I was bullied, and for me that was the start of, on top of already having anxiety as a child to now being bullied on top of that, it created a full-blown anxiety around school, and that would carry out throughout the entirety of my school years. I remember there have been multiple mornings of me crying and begging not to go to school, dragging my feet, going to the car and just crying and screaming and just not wanting to go to school because of how overwhelming the feeling of anxiety and dread was. I remember just like crying on the way to school in the car because I was made to go to school, and because school's compulsory obviously, but like just crying and screaming screaming and coughing and just so distressed about going to school that it would continue on into the car, and then my parents would go get the principal to try and help me get into class. And some mornings it didn't work. Some mornings they could not get me to go to school. They could not, like, they would have to take me to my grandma's house, or I would stay home because I couldn't go to school. I was so scared. I was so anxious. It was so overwhelming for me. You know, that carried on through many years, throughout grade 1 to, I would say, about grade 3. I don't know, because I know I moved schools in grade 1 because of the bullying. It was getting too much for me to handle, and so we moved schools closer into the estate that we were living in at the time. And you know, that school was pretty good because I had kinder friends, so it was a school where I knew people, and it was easier for me to pick up friendships and make some friendships, and they lasted me actually until I moved schools in grade 4, because we moved to another side of town, so somewhere I knew no one. We were closer to my family, but I knew no one, and that again brought so much anxiety because I didn't know anyone, and I would have to go through that, approaching people and making new friends and talking to people, something that I found so difficult and something that brings me anxiety. So, you know, again, the anxiety picked up, and many mornings of screaming and yelling and please don't make me go to school. I don't want to go to school. I don't have any friends. I'm just alone. Like, I just don't want to go to school. Absences because school was too overwhelming for me. It was starting to really affect my sleep as well. I just remember as soon as it started to get dark, the feeling of angst would just overcome me, and there was no reason for it. There were so many sleepless nights of me just laying in bed not able to sleep because of that dread and angst that I couldn't explain and didn't know why it was happening. But I had to have my mum sleep with me nearly every night. If she didn't sleep with me, she was laying next to me until I fell asleep. And some nights she would think I'd fall asleep and I would be asleep, but I would feel her move and the anxiety would hit again. So my sleep was becoming really bad. It got to a point where I couldn't sleep without anyone, and it was affecting school. It was affecting my anxiety because I wasn't sleeping. My anxiety was worse, but then the anxiety was affecting my sleep, and it got to the point where my parents were like, this is enough, like, she's struggling and we need to get her some help. So we went to the doctors, and I got diagnosed with general anxiety disorder, and through that I started seeing my psychologist that I still see to this day. You know, I've always been the worst sleeper since a baby, and I think that also has a play with anxiety. It's just like this vicious cycle that I have, and I still am a really bad sleeper. But when I started seeing my psychologist, we started to try and tackle those things going on in my head. I started to learn the signs of when my anxiety was hitting and what some of my triggers were and how to handle and calm down those emotions, and I was able to manage and cope with it. And I had an understanding of what those feelings I was feeling. I now understand them to be anxiety, but back then I had no idea what it was, and it made it that much more overwhelming. So through seeing my psychologist, we were able to work on it. My sleep was getting a little bit better. I think at the age of around 12, 13, one night it just clicked. And I was able to I went into bed and I put myself to sleep, and I slept through the whole night, and I've been like that ever since. But it just shows that, like, therapy was working. I was able to work through some of the stresses and triggers and figure out, like, how to deal with them so that I can cope and live my life without every morning of crying and every night stressing about falling asleep. We worked through some of my fears of, like, being scared of not being enough for the other kids at school, not being enough to be liked. And the more I spoke about it, the more I realized, hang on, that's not true. Like, you know, the more I spoke about it, the more I was getting better. When I was maybe 12, in grade 6, I'm pretty sure, or 5, late grade 5, early grade 6, I was able to stop seeing my psychologist. And by all means, it wasn't easy. There was a lot of work that went into that. But I got to a point where I could stop seeing him. And those mornings of crying, begging, they became less frequent. I still had them. I still had my off days, but they became less frequent. And then high school started. I remember when I first started high school, the anxiety wasn't too bad. It was still at a point where I could manage it. I know starting high school, it was a little bit more heightened because it's a new environment, a new set of standards that you have to live up to, new teachers and new kids. I was fortunate that I went into a high school where a lot of people from my old primary school went, and I also had 3 cousins in the same year level, so I wasn't completely alone, and I think that made my transition a lot easier. At times that social anxiety was there, but there's one particular situation that I am so glad I pushed through, and I had those strategies through seeing my psychologist to push through them, and I met my best friend through through my social anxiety. I made that approach and we became best friends, and he was my best friend through all of high school, and without him, I don't know how different my experience through high school and my experience with anxiety and my experience with depression in high school would have been. I don't know if I would have made it through, to be honest. The first 2 years of high school were pretty easy. They were the easier years of high school. They're pretty hazy, if I'm being honest, and I don't think a lot happened in terms of my mental health. I still had my daily struggles, but through the strategies that I had, I was able to push through them and manage. It was nothing I couldn't handle. But then the age 14 hit, and let me tell you, 14 hit hard. 14 was the start of the hardest times I've had in my life, and let's just say this is where it starts to get a little bit more real, and this is where it really starts to pick up and it starts to get worse. I'm gonna be real about how it affected me, and I want to be honest and I want to be open. When I was 14, a lot of changes were happening in my life. I started to notice that a lot of things were starting to get a little bit harder for me to deal with, and my anxiety had started to increase. I was noticing those mornings when I would wake up and I'm just like, I don't want to go to school today. I can't go to school. Those mornings of anxiety and tears were happening again. And at this time, there was a lot going on in my personal life, at home, and at school as well. I was needed as a support system, and I was more than happy to be a support system, and that's I have some of my best memories from that time in my life. But I was starting to notice that things were getting a little bit more harder for me to deal with. But this was also a challenging time because I was starting to notice that downfall in my mood and my mental health. I think one of the first signs that I had that something wasn't up was constant headaches. I would wake up with them and then I would go to sleep with them. And every day it was constantly having headache. And I would go to the doctors and tell them about this. I would get my eyes checked and do all those things, seeing if something was up. But it wasn't until I had an MRI and I got the all clear that everything was fine. I was just having these headaches for no reason, that the headaches just kind of stopped. And also during this time, I was noticing that it was getting a lot harder for me to get out of bed in the morning, harder and harder every morning. I was struggling with that motivation. I was anxious, and I was just noticing that my mood was down. I just wasn't feeling myself. I was sad, unmotivated, I was angry, I was just a whirlwind of emotions that I didn't understand why I was feeling like that. I was really taking a step backwards from where I was, and it wasn't until that MRI I got the all clear, and the headaches kind of just were still there, I guess, but the all clear, it was okay, I think it's time for me to speak up about how I'm feeling, because I was going through this all on my own. There were so many nights of just not being able to sleep because of the thoughts going through my head. The thoughts of, you're not enough, your friends don't need you, you're just you don't need to go to school, your friends don't need you, they're fine without you, you're not gonna be missed. I was dealing with that every night. So then I would wake up in the morning and that dread of school would be there, and I'm like, but what's the point of going? I had this anxiety going to school, and then I had these thoughts of just these dark thoughts that they weren't true, but I really believed them, and my mood just plummeted. And I was dealing with this all on my own while helping my friends and helping my family through what we were going through at the time, and it just got too much, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this on my own anymore. I need to speak up. So I decided to. I said to my dad, can we go for a drive? And I told him how I was feeling, and we decided that we were gonna go to the doctors and we were gonna go get a referral to start seeing my psychologist again. So when I was 14, maybe 15, I got diagnosed with depression. And when I got that diagnosis, the headaches stopped completely. They just disappeared, and I had a better understanding of why I was feeling the way I was feeling. Again, it wasn't just me. There was a reason for those feelings, and it made me feel better in a way. You know, having that diagnosis made things a lot easier in a way, because I knew that when I felt down, or when I felt angry, when I felt sad, when I felt whatever my emotions were, I knew that it was because of my depression and it was because of my anxiety. But in saying that, things didn't get easier from there. It actually got harder and it got worse. And when I started seeing my psychologist again, I think that was the best decision I ever made, because he helped me, as well as my best friend and family members. They helped me through this, because this is really like the darkest time I've had. I remember around 15, 16, I had a falling out with one of my closest friends, you know, and it hit me so hard. You know, I went from one day seeing them all the time, speaking to them, and, you know, to not talking, to not hanging out, to it not being how it used to be in a matter of like a week. And that hit me so hard because of my fears of like making friends and losing people that I care about and I love. And when that happened, it was like shit, that my fear just came true. And I understand why that happened, because I wasn't good. I was going through my own things and they were going through their own things, and we just needed that time. I understand that now, but when it happened, it hit me really, really hard. I remember around that time too, I was starting to not go to school. I actually remember just being so sad and so down that I physically could not get out of bed. I remember telling myself, Ebony, you need to get up, you need to move, you need to go to school, like it'll be good for you, you'll feel better once you get there. But the thoughts were like, they were just so dark. They were telling you, like, you know, you're not worth it, like, you don't need an education, you're fine without it, just stay in bed, don't help yourself, don't just let yourself feel bad. And I remember so many days of just laying in bed on my own, home alone, because I had argued with my parents in the morning saying like, I don't want to go to school, I can't go to school, leave me alone, don't come in my room, just don't wake me up, don't just leave me alone, like I'm not going to school. And just crying, and just like I couldn't get out of bed, and I was anxious and I was sad, and I was just, it was horrible, just like so many mornings of that. And then it would carry out through the day, and when people were gone, I would lay in bed and I would cry and I would just stare into nothing. And I was gaining weight because I wasn't moving. My personal hygiene like just plummeted. I physically just could not take care of myself a lot of the time. I was overeating, I was just sitting in bed all day, and there were so many nights of when people went to bed that the anxiety would just overcome me, and the depression would just overcome me, and I would just be this, my whole body would be so full of energy, like negative energy, that I could not keep still. There were so many nights where I would be shaking because of how anxious I was, and I would be picking my lips, which I still do to this day. I'd be picking my lips and shaking, my legs would be shaking, and my heart would be racing, and I would be like hyperventilating, and I just could not keep still. I remember there would be nights where I would just be like hitting my head against the wall and like hitting my head against pillows because I just was so anxious, and I couldn't I couldn't keep still. I just didn't know what to do with my hands. I couldn't deal with all this energy that I had. So I remember those nights, and it got too much. I remember there were some nights where I just really didn't feel suicidal. I just really did not feel safe in my body because I was like just overcome by the depression and anxiety. I just didn't know what to do. And so there were times where I would be like, take me to the hospital because I just don't know what's going to happen. I don't feel like I just don't feel safe in my body. And so I think I got taken to the hospital about 3 times, and they would give me medication just to help the anxiety. So they gave me with like Valium just to ease it, and you know, I would be able to sleep, because there were so many nights of just not sleeping. So many nights of like I would just lay in bed all night staring at the wall. And yeah, so it got pretty dark. And I remember I had stopped going to school at this point, and during that time I would start babysitting for my cousin, my mum's cousin, and I would start babysitting them, and that gave me some sort of purpose in my day. And I remember one day I just hit breaking point. I wasn't at school. My parents, I had argued with my parents that morning because I wasn't going to school. Like I just couldn't go to school, and just the arguing, and feeling so shit because I knew I was letting them down. I was letting myself down. I packed a bag and put whatever in my bag, and I went to my grandma's because I said to Mum, okay, I'm going to go to my grandma's because they didn't want to leave me alone. So I went to my grandma's with that bag, and I just, at my grandma's, was like, I think she went to the toilet, and I just walked out the door. And I started walking to the bus stop, and I got on the bus. I was like, I didn't know what I was doing. It just was all happening. Like I had no control of it. It just started happening. And I remember being on the bus, and I'm like, oh my god, Ebony, what are you doing? Where are you gonna go? Like, just what are you doing? And I remember I was like, okay. So I got on the phone. I picked up my phone and I called my mom's cousin, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I just packed a bag and I just left Bob's. I'm on the bus and I don't know where I'm going. And I was, at the time, I'm like just shaky right now thinking about it. And I was just like so anxious. I'm like, I don't know. I just can't be home anymore. I just can't do it. I don't know why. I just know I can't. I hit breaking point, and I was like, I don't know where I'm going. I'm on the bus. And she's like, come to my house. And I stayed there for a week. I ran away from home, and I don't know why to this day. What caused, like, why I felt like I couldn't be home. But I spent a week there, and that was really my breaking point. And that was where, from that week, I had that time on my own to really reassess what was going on in my head, and really like tell myself that this is it. You can't keep going on like this. Things need to change. And when I went from being picked up at the end of that week and going home, that's when things started to get better eventually. I was still seeing my psychologist, and something clicked in my head. I was like, okay, you need to work, you need to get better. Like, I was thinking I was year 10, so year 11 I dropped out of school and I went to TAFE and did recal for a year, because I think everything that, like, things happened at school, things happened there, and I was like, I just can't go back to that school. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna change school and I'm gonna get work. I'm gonna work towards something that I really want to do. So I did recal and I started doing a certificate that I wanted to do, and I made one of my best friends there. And slowly things started to get better. Those dark nights started to become less frequent, and the anxiety wasn't as bad. It was just slowly starting to decrease with all the work that I was putting in. And then at the end of year 11, I was in a place where I felt good. I still had my attacks, my anxiety attacks, and I still had those nights, but I felt like, you know what? I'm in a place where I am proud of where I am and I want to return back to school. And I think if it wasn't for all the support that I had through my parents, through my grandparents, through my friends, and through my mom's cousin, that I wouldn't be able to graduate high school. The fact that I left and went back to the same school and completed year 12 when I thought I wouldn't even finish school because I could not get there, and I got there. I graduated year 12, and that's one of my proudest achievements, was being able to get through high school when all that had happened. I had gone through all of that and I was still able to graduate year 12 when I thought I never would have done that a few years ago. And like, I find myself now thinking, wow, like everything that I've been through, I'm so proud of where I am today. You know, none of that was easy, but I did it. And you know, talking about it now, it makes me think even more like, wow, I'm so grateful for everyone that helped me. I can never thank them enough. If it wasn't for them and I don't know if I would be here today. I don't know how bad it would have gotten if I didn't hit that breaking point and had that support that I did have. Yeah. So that's basically my story with anxiety and depression and how it affected me. I've had a few more breakdowns in between, but nothing as this was my hardest one that I've gone through. And I am so grateful for it because it has made me the person I am today. Everything that I went through and everything that I pushed through has made me so much stronger. I don't sweat the small things anymore. I've learnt that like the small things don't matter. Like, you've got to be grateful for the things that you have and the things that for the people that you have. Like, realize that what doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger, and that is such a true saying. You know, I feel like I've learned that the feeling won't last forever, and when you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, it's there. You just have to work for it, and you just have to trust, and you have to believe in yourself that life is really worth living. It may be hard at the moment, but it is really worth it. You know, you are worth it. Life has so much to offer, and you just need to breathe and let the feeling pass. You know, I know that those days are so hard, and some days it's not days, sometimes it's days, it's weeks, it's years. My anxiety and depression was so bad for 3 years, and it progressed, and I had my waves of like, it's good, it's bad, it's good, it's bad, it's good, it's bad. And I'm so glad that I pushed through them. And I let the feeling pass and I breathe through it, because I can see that light at the end of the tunnel. And when I still have my days, I'm like, no, good things are coming. It's not gonna be forever. Those feelings aren't gonna last forever. But that's my story with anxiety and depression. I hope that by you listening to this, I've helped someone, maybe helped you feel less alone and helped you feel like, hey, I'm not the only one going through this similar situation, or hang on, I have that feeling too, like I'm not alone. I hope that, you know, maybe I've helped you in any way, or you've resonated with my story. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I don't know if that's really appropriate to say, because like it wasn't a very fun topic, but it's real and it happens. Having depression and anxiety can be so lonely. You may have that support system, but you really do feel so alone and so isolated when you're going through it. And I just want you to know that you're not alone, and you do have people there for you that will help you if you need it. And all you have to do is ask and reach out, which I know can be so hard. So yeah, anyway, I'm rambling again. I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.